Radio St. George, 100.3 KXDI, St. George, Utah. It's Artie Fufkin. I'm the producer of The Garden Show, and it's time for The Garden Show right now with Woody. And we do this every Saturday morning at 8 o'clock from Dixie State University. We want to thank Professor Sean Denovan here in the Communications Department for letting us do The Garden Show. It's time for The Garden Show. And ladies and gentlemen, if you want to call us, you can call us at 435-879-4100. That's 435-879-4100. And we're live on Facebook Live. And you can text us at the number too, 435-879-4100. And it's time to get going.
Hey, how are you, Artie?
It's Woody.
It's Woody.
I'm just the producer.
I'm here.
I'm just the producer. I'm just producing the show. You have the content. I have no idea. I have no gardening skills whatsoever. So you're the one that creates all the magic.
Yeah, but you've got the magic console there.
I don't know about that.
I have a special guest here today, Dr. Steve, who's we're going to talk to because he is an expert gardener and my neighbor.
Oh, wonderful.
I was thinking the other day I could throw a rock from my backyard to his backyard, but I don't think I could anymore. There was a day when I could have thrown a softball that far, I'm sure. But anyway, he's here. But we have something that's more important.
What's that?
It's an announcement we have to make. I'm sorry, Artie, but it's your birthday.
Oh my gosh.
Happy birthday.
Oh, that's
to
embarrassing.
You.
Happy
birthday.
Oh, that's
to
embarrassing.
You.
No.
Happy birthday, dear Artie.
Oh, my gosh.
Happy birthday.
Oh, I feel so stupid.
And we have a gift.
I feel embarrassed.
We have a gift, Artie.
What is it?
It's from the city of St. George.
Oh my goodness! What it's it's a picture of cats.
Artie's a cat guy.
Yeah, I help with the animal rescue here in town, RSQ Dog Rescue, and this is a picture that Woody. You drew this, yeah.
I colored it,
this, so very nice. I'll have to post that on Facebook.
And there's even a card that goes with it, Artie.
Awesome. Okay, well, thanks. Let's get.
I'm not going to tell him how old you are. You're what, 28 again?
Oh, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Today I'm telling you, happy birthday. May all your days be happy ones. All right. Thank you for your friendship. Awesome. Wonderful. Well, that's horrible and embarrassing. No, thank you.
We planned that for a long time.
Okay. Well, Woody, let's get the ball rolling. Let's talk about gardening.
Okay, let's do it. We have talked about a lot of different subjects on our show, and one of our most popular, that's not correct, but one of our popular things to do is have guests in and hear about their experiences. So Steve is actually a person that gardens and has enough production that he actually brings me things from his garden.
Oh, wonderful.
So I thought as a reward for bringing me some squash, why we should have him on the show. So, Steve, why don't you give us a little information on how you got interested in gardening and where you started? Was it when you were young, or?
All right. I grew up in northern Utah, up in Orem, and both of my grandfathers had gardens. One was in Pleasant Grove, and one was in Orem. And I helped them growing up, hauling rocks, tilling, working in the orchards, irrigating, and was exposed to gardening and growing crops and food and that sort of thing. And of course, I was involved in the harvesting and the preserving and all of that kind of growing up. But I never had a garden myself until after I was married, and we moved to Salt Lake, where I was going to medical school. And I says, "There's a little 6 by 5 foot spot behind the carport that I can maybe try my hand at this." And so
that for those that are not familiar with that area, why Orem and Pleasant Grove, those are good areas to garden.
Right.
And back in the day, it was orchards.
Oh, yeah.
Everywhere.
And what they used to call truck farms, where people would grow things and they'd have a dirt path down the middle. My dad was involved with produce, and we would drive a flatbed truck down there, and they would load the produce onto the trucks, and then we'd take it right to the market.
Wow.
You know, radishes and whatever they would be growing. There was a lot of those out in North Salt Lake and Bountiful.
Yeah, and in high school, summer jobs, I took over the managing of the orchards for my grandparents, and
Oh, wow.
and I remember in my 1961 VW van, I would take big crates of cherries, and I'd go all over the East Bench in Orem and Provo trying to sell
Absolutely.
cherries.
Yeah.
And what was left over, I took down to give to the cherry processor down by the railroad in Provo. You know, when I couldn't sell, but so I was involved in that all growing up, and then
wonderful.
just over the years, you know, when we finally got here to St. George's, I kind of got into it more seriously.
You have a yard that's got a fairly good-sized area for growing, don't you?
Right. We have I have an area that's an orchard for fruit trees. I got cherries, peaches, apricots, apple, plum, pear trees, Asian pear, almond, pomegranate.
Oh, my God.
Lots of grapes,
my goodness.
blackberries, and strawberries. You know.
I didn't realize you had that many trees over
Yeah, and then also we got a big plot where we plant you know, the vegetables that I've grown over the years. But it's worked out well. But I learned when I got here that you can't just put the seeds in the ground in this St. George soil and water it and
Doesn't work.
expect it to work.
No, it doesn't
you know,
work
I've figured out what you have to do.
Well,
Yeah.
What
Up
do
in,
you have to do?
Up in Salt Lake, you know, you could just practically throw the seeds out there and then walk out 6 weeks later and pick the tomatoes. Not here.
No.
It takes a lot more effort and
Right,
that'd be a good thing to talk about. Would be the differences.
Absolutely.
But first, tell us what you grow in your garden.
All right. Well, I like most people do. Tomatoes. I grow tomatoes, but also I've had success with onions, peppers, and as you mentioned, squash. I grow huge banana squash that I was pretty happy with.
They're my favorite. Those big bananas.
But I love the butternuts too, and the acorns and some of these other ones. Squash does really well here. Beets, carrots. I've done kohlrabi, eggplant, corn. And one of the things that I've learned is that if you plant the squash and the melons in the corn bed area, that the corn provides some shade for the squash, and it actually works pretty well. And done potatoes, chard, spinach, lettuce, kale. Kale does really well here. Brussels sprouts haven't done so well here, but really well. Cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli do pretty well here.
I think Brussels sprouts is probably too warm.
Yeah.
Yeah, they need a cold climate.
Yeah, so that, you know, I get these tiny little buds coming off. The biggest one I've got is about the size of my thumb. But,
yeah.
But it's still pretty much most things you can grow here, but you got to do something to the soil, because if you don't, it's not going to grow.
I know when I started mine, I had a plot maybe 20 by 20, and I kept trying to amend it and amend it and amend it, and years went by. 7, 8, 10 years, and it was still just as bad as it was when I started. So I went to the raised bed gardening. What are your feelings about raised bed versus the conventional kind of gardening?
Well, honestly, I don't have much experience with the raised bed here. Mine's conventional, but with a drip system. But you really have to, like you said, amend the soil, meaning you have to put a lot of organic material into this sandy soil, which is not very fertile. And so I've taken truckloads of Nutrimulch and compost and just till it every spring into the soil.
So that's something you've had to do every year.
Yeah, pretty much. You have to do that every year. And plus, I've got myself a composter. It's a big compost tumbler, so that grass clippings and all the organic stuff from the vegetable matter from the kitchen will put in the compost. And so all summer long, I'm making compost about every 2 weeks, get a big thing, and I throw that in the garden or in the orchard too.
That makes sense.
So it's a constant process.
Thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's about what you have to do if you do conventional gardening in the ground, as opposed to. I'm in the raised bed situation now, and every spring I put compost and fertilizers in and turn the soil over within the raised bed, but not as to the point that you're talking about. But I know out where we live, the Utah State Extension Service has tested the soil, and you're supposed to have about a 2 on the scale for alkaline salts in your soil, and we were 14.
Wow!
And so you're fighting that alkaline, and then of course, as you fertilize and you water, then you get more alkaline in the soil. So that's a constant fight.
Right.
So it's difficult, and you put that together with the heat of the summer down here, and that it makes it so that gardening is not a hobby for sissies.
That's right. Well, luckily my plot is on the west side of the garden plot. I've got these big pine trees that provide some shade, so that's gotten better, so that the hot afternoon sun isn't,
So it's filtered.
It's filtered a little bit, and I know that some people will actually put up shade, artificial shade over their garden to prevent the sun from kind of burning.
Yeah, when we had Doug in here from Star Nursery, and he mentioned that I hadn't thought about, that there are certain varieties of tomatoes, and mostly the hybrids, that require shade, and they do a lot better if they're not shaded. When it gets July and August, they cease to pollinate. Some of the old heirlooms don't do that, but the new hybrids do. So there you go. You've got to learn about the weaknesses and the strengths of the different varieties. And when you choose tomatoes, it isn't just like, well, let's go to Walmart and get 10 tomato plants. You've got to actually get into which ones do better in the heat. I try 4th of July, and some of those that are supposed to have early pollen or early production, stuff that matures in 50, 60 days instead of 90 or 100. But I hadn't thought about the hybrid needing the shade and stuff, and that was interesting to know that.
Yeah, so over the years, when I set this up, we raised our family here, and so one of the hard things for raising a family in this times is that you trying to teach your kids how to work in a place where there's not a farm anymore to get the kids to work on, and so that was an area, the back 40, if you will, where the kids all learned how to go out and weed and work and mow the lawn out in that area and help with the orchard, and so it was a love-hate relationship for them. They didn't quite like it at the time, but I think it served them well, learning kind of how to work and to enjoy the fruits of your labors.
Well, what are some of the things that you found that you have to do differently down here as opposed to the Orem area?
Well, one thing is you do, like we talked, we have to amend the soil. If you don't, you're not going to grow anything here. The other thing is you have to be a little conservative, or I have my garden and orchard on a drip system. Some places down here, some of the old timers still probably have the flood irrigation,
Right.
that sort of thing. But you can't just broadcast sprinkler your garden. You'll get mildews. You got to have some sort of system like that. So I have a drip system that I snake through my garden plot. That
Do you find that works pretty well?
It works pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah, I've in my raised bed, I run the sprinkler pipe right down the middle, and then I have the emitters and the bubblers right by the plants, and that works better for me. That mildew can be a real problem.
Yeah, and so so I'm able to. So every fall, I'll pull all the drip line out, the tubing, and then I'll go in with my rototiller and go over it a couple of times and throw in the soil, and so it's a bit of work, but being a physician, it's and kind of in the hospital for my normal job, I love to get out and get my hands dirty.
Yeah.
So it's fun to.
Yeah, and it's a distraction. Yeah. And I think the other thing is there is nothing to me that tastes better than something that you grow in your garden and you go out and pick it and walk in and cook it.
Except for kale.
Yeah,
Just kidding.
Yeah. I grew that once, and I found that didn't use it that much. Wasn't that much. wasn't used that much. But hey, there's nothing better than a fresh tomato sandwich. If you just do that, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And so I've made an effort to try to only grow things that we actually use, because when I started with my little occupation I have with the seeds, well, I was excited to grow things that were unusual, like kohlrabi and so on, and then you grow it, you harvest it, and you try it, and if you like it, you do it again. And there's been some new things like kohlrabi that we found that we do like, but there's been a few things that we've tried that we don't care for. I think that one of the things I'd like to get over to our listeners is that gardens take quite a bit of work. It's not something that you can go out and walk through your garden and admire it, and then 2 or 3 weeks go by and you go out and do it again. You've got to check the garden. You've got to watch the weeds. You've got to watch the insects. You've got to watch the production of your garden. It's a hands-on, continual project.
Yeah, and it's gotten away from me a few times. You go, you're busy at work, or you go on vacation for a couple of weeks. You go back out, and whoa, what happened?
Yeah.
So,
I've got a blackberry patch that I'm trying to bring along, and I looked at it just yesterday, and I thought, wow, I've got to spend some time out there.
Yeah.
In the spring, I try to organize the stalks and things so that when the growth comes and the berries come, I'll be able to get in there.
Right.
So, but blackberries seem to do pretty good down here.
Yeah, they do. I've got blackberries, and they do okay. And raspberries I've struggled with. I have 1 or 2 raspberry plants, and I get a few off of it, but
I think that's. I've been told that raspberries are really tough down here because just too hot.
Yeah. The other thing I've found is in my orchard, I like apples, and finally my apple tree, it's a gala, has gotten big enough that the foliage of the tree will shade the developing fruit. And so for years, it just never really worked, and the apples were actually, you get into July and August, and the apple fruit, it gets essentially cooked on the tree by the sun.
Yeah.
And so, but finally, it's gotten to the point where the tree itself will shade the fruit, and it's developed really nice, got great crops, but it's still not a great place for apples, I've discovered, because it's not that crisp, fresh
Cold
bite that you get. It's still a little mushy, if you will, but really tasty. And so I've been using my apples to make applesauce, and so that works out really well.
I've been trying to get an asparagus garden growing, and that's the same thing with asparagus. It takes it isn't a 1-year project; it's a 4 or 5 year project, because the root system and the stalks have to get big enough that you can start harvesting them. And I love asparagus, but I've been working on that now for 6 or 7 years to get it to where it actually is mature enough to really produce some stalks that are, you go out and you harvest your asparagus, and then you walk in one of the stores, and it's $1.98 a pound, and there's these great big bunches of asparagus, and you wonder why you're going to so much trouble.
Well, that's the same thing that I learned, because I grew up, my grandfather grew peas, and so, in the early summer, we'd go over there and we'd harvest peas and end up with, bowls full of peas. But here, it's almost not worth it for the amount that you get. I mean, the fresh pea is delicious, but you have to plant a whole lot of pea plants in order to get more than just a little handful of peas.
A lot of work.
And then I go over to the, and you got these frozen bags of fresh peas, and I say, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
So I don't plant peas. And
if you did, you'd have them planted right now, because it's late to plant peas almost.
Right.
Yeah, because they do better in the cold. So,
but but fresh. There's certain things that you can't do without if you're a gardener. Is the tomato, because it's a totally different animal. Taking one out of your garden and trying to buy one at the store.
Oh yeah, the ones at the store they're just hideous.
But the other things that are, and then I talked about the lettuce and the spinach. That's kind of early season, because then when it gets in the middle of the summer, it's too hot, and those go away. And so, or it's either early or late.
Yeah, my wife likes the spinach, and I found it to be really easy to grow, and I love the way that you can go out and cut the leaves, and then a week later they're back, and you can cut them again. In fact, you've got to cut them when they're small, because that's when they're tender. And so it's kind of a thing that just keeps coming back and paying you back. Another thing that does fairly well for me are carrots. Right. And carrots are useful in a lot of different ways. Carotene is a sweetener, and you put some carrots in a nice batch of soup, and it flavors the soup. And I've always liked carrots, and they're kind of fun. They really are.
One of the things that I've also, I cook. I like to cook also, and one of the, I like the different flavors and different techniques. But I grow my own herbs, and I've got oregano and which is a perennial, obviously, and then a basil you have to plant every year. But thyme and parsley comes back every year. I even recently planted some lemongrass for some for Asian flavor that's kind of interesting. It's good. And one that I discovered is garlic chives, which it works really well to add flavoring, that kind of garlic flavor that without actually garlic.
I think Dr. Steve is maybe unusual in the fact that not only does he do gardening, but he does cooking, and he does preserving.
Right.
And maybe that's because of your background with your grandparents.
Yeah, I think that is, and I enjoy that sort of thing. So you have a big orchard and a garden. You either eat it all really fast, fresh, or give it away because it's going to start spoiling, or you learn how to preserve. And so I've learned how to do canning and do my own, put up my own pears and peaches and that sort of thing.
Do you ever do freeze drying?
Yeah, I got about 3 years ago. Got the freeze dryer.
Oh wow!
And that's been awesome.
Yeah. What works best?
Well, the one thing is that, like I talked about, the apples that aren't really good fresh, and you either do applesauce. The other thing you do, you slice them up and you freeze dry them.
Oh.
Because they're really good freeze dried because they're dry.
Oh, they're
and
excellent.
They're great and with a good flavor. And so,
And is it apricots? They have the apricot leather in the store
Yeah.
that you buy.
yeah,
Is that a freeze?
that's not a freeze dry thing. That's a
Drying.
dehydrator
Yeah,
thing.
that's different. Okay.
Yeah, so that's different. But you can freeze dry. I've freeze dried the pears and the Asian pears and a lot of the vegetables I'll do too. Like I end up with a lot of squash, and so I will bake it and then cut it up, and then I'll freeze dry it. And so you've got cooked squash that's freeze dried, and then I will seal that in a vacuum packed jar. So you've got these that seal thing that sucks the air out in the bags. There's attachments that will actually seal a normal canning jar and make it vacuum packed, so that will last for 25 years.
Oh,
I
didn't know that.
You've got cooked squash that all you have to do is just add hot water to it, and then you.
Wow.
So that's one way that I've been able to preserve.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, so
That's a really good idea.
One of the fads that's happening right now is pressure cooking. Christmas, everybody had these Instapots that pressure cook and so on. And it takes me back to when I was a young person with my parents, and a pressure cooker then was a different animal. You locked the lid on, and nobody went in the kitchen while the pressure cooker was going because it might explode and all these different things. Do you do pressure cooking? Have you had experience with that?
Well, I grew up with my mom pressure cooker. Essentially, that was our meals was pressure cooked.
Oh.
I grew up on venison and
Yeah,
vegetables, and so you throw the meat and the potatoes in the pressure cooker, and then you got a meal. That was what we ate. But I've used I did get an Instant Pot or whatever, and
Right.
I've used that a few times, and it speeds up the process for sure. It's good.
Do you find that it tenderizes? Well, of course, we're getting into meat now instead
Right.
of. But do you find it tenderizes
It does tenderize the meat.
Yeah. So you save a little time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the. I don't know what term to use, but it's not the hard-nosed type of pressurized cooking that we did when we were kids. It's a little modified, I think.
Well, I think it's a little automated too. Makes it a little easier.
And I think the actual pressure that it puts on the food is less. We used to pressure cook at 100 pounds, 110 pounds, and I think those are like 60 pounds pressure, so that makes a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, but as far as, other ways to preserve, so the tomatoes, actually bottled tomatoes, I've actually freeze-dried some tomatoes too, and I've used them, and it works pretty well. But the pears, we'll put those up, and I'll actually make pear butter.
That's interesting.
Which is, it's kind of, people think of butter, it's different. It's basically slow-cooked jam or preserve, of the. Yeah, sometimes I'll add some spices to it, and you cook it down, and then you use it as a spread.
It's like apple butter.
It's like apple butter. Yeah. It's really good, and I've done that with peaches and the apples too.
Oh, peaches that's my favorite fruit. Yeah.
Yeah, and then what I've discovered a fruit that not many people know about that is my favorite for making jams, and it's a pluot. A pluot.
Huh.
And
I think I went with her in high school.
Yeah. So a pluot, if you divide the word up, it's a combination of a plum and an apricot.
Oh.
So a pluot.
Interesting.
And so it's not both fruit on the same tree like they do. They graft different types of fruit on the same tree, but this is actually a hybrid fruit that's a combination of a
do you have a pluot tree?
And I've got a pluot tree.
Oh, wow.
And the fruit looks like kind of a pale pink plum, a little larger, a little firmer, but it's delicious.
Wow.
And it's great for making pluot jam. It's awesome.
And that's good.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And then pomegranate, I make my own juice and jelly. Grapes. You make gallons of grape
What
juice.
kind of grapes do you grow?
I do have, I think, 2 vines of the Thompson, which are the table grapes,
the eating grapes,
the eating grapes, and I've discovered that it makes more than I can use, and so I actually did some freeze drying of that, and those things are great snacks.
Oh, they're delicious.
They're little freeze dried grape chips.
Yeah,
and those are really good. But the rest of them, I've got the Concord plus multiple other juice varieties, and then I use those for first like pink, and then white, and then purple grape juice.
Artie and I, we do a little program like that. It's we test wines to see what kind of grapes they come from. We get a couple of gallons of wine, and
I bet those programs get to be pretty fun and raucous.
Well, it's an extensive research situation there. Artie likes the Concord, and I'm more the white wine kind of guy.
Yeah.
But my grapes. I don't know how. I thought I was buying Thompson, and I got these little perlite grapes, and so they're small. But I get a lot of them. I'll get, in August when they come on, I'll get maybe 100 pounds of grapes, and we take and of course clean them and take the stems out, and we put them in bags and just freeze them, and. Without the drying, but the freezing, and you can sit at night, you're watching TV or doing some activity, and you can pop those grapes, and they're really a cool, sweet treat. And we do that, and then we give a lot of them to the grandkids and, whoever we can get to take them.
Yeah, yeah.
So, grapes do pretty well down here. They really do. Well, we're going to have a program this spring, and I haven't quite figured out how we're going to do it, but we want to teach people how to trim those grapes. That makes a difference.
Well, you got to cut them back every year, because my grapes are close enough to my orchard trees, especially some of the bigger trees. You get those grapevines that they'll find a place to grow, and they'll go clear up in those trees. And so so every year I've got to cut those down and pull those big grape branches
runners out.
But you got to cut it down basically to the nub.
Yeah, I've had squash that have grown up in my trees, and I'll go out and I'll notice that there's a banana squash
oh my goodness.
hanging out over the tree.
Oh my goodness.
And it kind of sneaks up there and goes up the tree, and they'll almost cover a small tree. They're aggressive.
Yeah,
they're looking for a place in the sun. So that's interesting. It's kind of funny the way that happens.
Yeah.
What else, Steve? Do you enjoy? The gardening and stuff.
Well, I enjoy making I made my own tomato sauce actually. So you end up with a lot of tomatoes instead of just putting up tomatoes in the jars, whole tomatoes.
Right.
I'll actually take the tomatoes and cook them down with some of the herbs from my garden, a little bit of onion and
maybe some green pepper or something.
And some fresh parsley, fresh oregano, and thyme, and cook that down. And then take your hand blender at the end of it, blend it all up, and then you preserve that. One of the things with tomato sauce, when you put anything green in it, you've got to do it under pressure. You got to preserve it under pressure, because of the possibility of the Clostridium tetany, the food poisoning you can get if it's not preserved under pressure.
Oh, no kidding.
You can't just do the hot water bath. Any of the green vegetables, anything like that, you've got to do it under pressure.
Wow.
Hey, there's an idea with that lady that's stalking you. We could give her some
Yeah.
Some green vegetables that we preserve.
Are you talking about poisoning my neighbor?
No. I wasn't going to say that out loud on the radio, Artie.
But that's, kind of learning how to, the pressure preserves is you got to do that with some of the things.
We put up chili sauce, and we do that every year because we love it so much. In my family, they back generations, they came from the South, and this recipe for chili sauce was a thing that was handed down, and it takes a lot of work. It's a full day to sit and peel the tomatoes, and we add a bunch of different things, a lot of onions, and it's basically a sweet relish. And, we'll put up 20, 30 quarts, and then during the year, in the winter months, when we have a roast or something, we have some chili sauce on it. I know my brother was trying to get me to send him some, which I didn't do. And he says that he scrambles eggs and puts chili sauce over it in the morning. But it's it's what you grow up with that you enjoy. It seems like it brings back memories, and it's amazing how something you eat can bring back memories. And I'm sure with you, it goes back to your childhood. And
yeah, I wouldn't say that my mother was that great of a cook, but I don't know. I've enjoyed.
I hope she's not a listener.
Yeah, it was more. We had 8 kids in our family. It was more about quantity than quality. And it was a melee when you get to the dinner table. But we had plenty to eat, but it wasn't.
First come, first serve, probably.
But one of the other things that that I didn't have up in experience with up in northern Utah is down here. Of course, I have 2 almond trees.
Oh wow!
And
when do those come out?
Yeah, it's really interesting because they're pretty early blossoming, but it takes a lot of time. It's pretty much in August when the almonds are ready, and basically, I've discovered that the longer you can leave them on the tree, they actually almost get roasted by the sun down here on the tree.
Yeah.
And so, the little covering of the almond nut opens up, and then you put a tarp underneath the tree at one point, and then you just kind of shake the tree, and the almonds will fall down, and they're almost roasted. It's really good, in this temperature. But that's been really good.
That's interesting.
Is it a lot of work to dispose of the shell, or not the shell?
They
but
come
the
off.
covering?
The varieties here is pretty easy. It comes off pretty
okay.
easy. You don't need a nutcracker or anything. So
I know I've on documentaries on TV they show these harvesters going through the orchards, and they have a machine that grips the trunk of the tree and shakes it. And everything falls.
It does.
It's really interesting the way
cool.
they do that.
And
you probably have one of those machines, don't you?
No, for 2 trees, no.
No,
I get out there with my foot and kick the trunk. But no, strawberries work here too really well. What
do you do with the almonds? If you do,
just eat them.
Just eat them.
Yeah.
Okay, I wondered if there was
put them in stuff.
Yeah.
I have, it's just
pecans, the pecan pies and different. Oh yeah, pecans are
goodness.
great.
I planted a pecan tree, 15 years ago probably, and it is slow, it's very slow growing, and it's.
Oh, is
it's
that right?
I don't have anything on that yet.
So it's still working.
Still working on it. Yeah. So, but
where did you go? Where do you go to buy your plants? Do you go to Star or?
Usually I go out to Hurricane to
Ballards.
Ballards.
Yeah,
I go out there.
Yeah, they're a good nursery. They do a lot of their own growing.
They do, and they're very knowledgeable about the local climate and varieties, and a lot of they've been very helpful over the years.
Yeah. Have you ever been to Sandia, out in Washington Fields? He grows. He's got a couple of greenhouses out there, and he grows a lot of his own stuff.
I haven't. I bet
he does. I was out there in December to talk to Larry. He's the owner, Larry Hancock, and he probably had 3,000 or 4,000 poinsettias in his greenhouse that he grows and supplies to the stores here in St. George. Most of those that you see in St. George come from his greenhouse, but he does a lot of vegetables and that type of thing. He's been in business out there for 40 years.
Wow.
Then that says something, about the way the man does his business and the way he runs it and so on.
Well, one I mentioned about the herbs. Just a word of caution for those of you who like mint, and maybe want to add mint to your Indian cooking or something like that. I planted a mint herb plant and realized that had ideas of conquering and conquest of the entire garden.
Oh my goodness! It just takes over, huh?
It basically will spread everywhere and
underneath
take
the
over
soil.
Everything. And so I would not plant that if you don't have a raised or a contained container for mint, because that will just take over everything.
I put some of that in my garden 15 years ago, and every spring we're still pulling the mint out.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness!
Your hands smell really good after you've worked for an hour out there. It sends runners everywhere.
It does.
So it's very.
So I would
aggressive.
avoid mint unless you put it in a container, that's all by itself.
Yeah.
It'll take over.
You have to isolate it. Put it in isolation.
Yeah. Let's see.
How about char? Do you like char? It grows well here.
It does.
Yeah, and it's like lettuce, where you trim the leaves when they're first coming out and they're tender.
I do like it. It does really well. I've tried the regular varieties and then the rainbow chard.
They have a rhubarb char, and I've got the impression, maybe a listener could call in or whatever, but I've got the impression that you can use the stalk of that a little bit too, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I've thought about putting rhubarb in there, but because my grandfather had a rhubarb plant.
Yeah, rhubarb was in northern Utah was popular.
But I don't know if it's too hot down here.
I can remember my mother cooking a rhubarb pie. I always enjoyed the strawberry rhubarb combination, but rhubarb by itself is a little strong for that. It's very tart and sweet.
Yeah, the other herb that I've found that I have not had success with, I love fresh cilantro in
okay,
absolutely.
It's really good. But I found that whenever I've tried to grow it, it bolts too soon, meaning that it just kind of goes to seed and it doesn't give you a lot of the leaves that you want.
Oh, I see.
And so, again, it's one of those things where, okay, do I want to mess with cilantro plant in my garden or go to the store and buy a big bunch for $1?
Yeah.
So
my wife grows most of the herbs, and we always do it in our pots. We have a dozen or so of these fairly large pots, and she'll do the garlic chives and the cilantro and those kind of things in pots, and that makes it a little bit better contained, And then you can, only thing with the pots is you have to remember to move them, the exposure to the sun and so on, because in the spring they'll be in the sun, and then halfway through the season they're in the shade. And if you don't notice, why, they're not doing well. So you have to move those around. And I've also found that down here, if you put anything in the pot, a tomato, a patio type tomato, you have to water more in the pots. The moisture evaporates quicker and drains out quicker than if they're in the soil. So that's something you have to kind of keep in mind. Potatoes, Steve, tell me about. I've never grown potatoes.
I've tried it a few years, and they do okay here. I don't know if it's great because I think by the time it takes to develop the tubers and the potato underneath the plant, the heat of the summer starts working on that plant up above, and it's too hot.
Oh my goodness!
But if you plant early enough, by the time they develop, you can get a good, you don't get a huge crop, but it works,
Do you? I know I try to get, especially my tomatoes, I try to get them in as soon as I can. I usually plant tomatoes in February, but I use the walls of water.
Yeah.
What method do you use to protect your crops and things in the early spring?
Yeah, I've used the walls of water before at your suggestion in order to get them in earlier.
Yeah.
And then, but that's essentially what I've used. Is
I know that in the old days they had these paper caps that you put over, and I actually bought some row covers where they're kind of an accordion wire thing, and they have a paper type of covering, and you can spread them out over 12 feet of the whatever you're trying to protect, and they work pretty well. They're a little bit awkward, and of course, if you have any wind, why they're rolled up the next morning against your fence. But walls of water are pretty substantial, and the wind doesn't bother them much.
What is that? I have no idea what that is.
They make a plastic circle.
Oh, okay.
And they're 18 inches high, and they are divided into cells. And what you do is put a 3-gallon bucket down over the plant. You put this plastic circle over the bucket. You fill the cells with water, and then you remove the bucket, and the structure kind of collapses and almost looks like a teepee.
Oh. Huh.
And during the day, the sun warms the water, and then at night, the warm water keeps the plant warm. It creates almost a mini greenhouse. And they grow really well, and it protects the plants, the tomatoes, down to about 15 degrees.
Wow.
And it doesn't very often get from February on down below 15 degrees in St. George. I mean, sometimes if the plant does so well, it grows out the top. Then if it gets cold, you lose the top of the tomato. But they're pretty good.
That's interesting.
I'm trying to remember, they used to be about $10 for 3 of them, and I think now it's more like $15 for 3.
Yeah, they're not cheap.
But over the years, I've bought them, and they last. I've used them over and over again, and now I have maybe, 15 or 20 of them, and they really do a job. They really do.
Yeah, that's been helpful to let you get an earlier start on the season.
Yeah, and that way, by the end of June, you're eating fresh tomatoes out of your garden.
That's great. That's
awesome. Before the heat comes.
Yeah. That's
when the tomatoes taste really good. Do you grow, what varieties of tomatoes do you like?
I think let's see, is it the boy, the
big boy?
Big boy, and then there's an early girl that I like, and
both of those are hybrids.
Yeah. Trying to think, I tried one of those heirlooms that have the purple.
Okay. Probably purple Cherokee or something like that.
I tried one of those, and that worked okay.
The heirlooms I found do almost get bigger than the hybrids down here, but they have the shoulders.
They have those big shoulders.
Yeah, the shoulders, and it kind of tucks in and almost looks like cloth that you've tucked and sewn. But taste-wise,
they're good.
I think the pink, can't think of the word, the pink Brandywine.
Yeah, that's the one I tried.
Yeah, they're almost, I think I've read where they're considered the best tasting tomato there is. And now they have a red Brandywine.
Yeah. And I like the Roma. They do well.
I like the Roma you grow in your garden. I don't care much for the ones you buy in the store. They're kind of like the other tomatoes. They They taste like my wife calls them red Kleenex tomatoes. There's no taste to them.
How about cherry tomatoes?
Yeah, I've tried those before, and those are really good.
For some reason, cherry tomatoes always do well.
Yeah, they do.
I mean, productivity-wise, we always have tomatoes for a salad, little tomatoes, and I usually just splice them in half, and
they're delicious.
Yeah, they are. The yellow pear tomato is a good tomato for salads too. You have to have about 70,000 of them to put them up.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Peppers. Peppers are getting to be more and more popular. If you look at the seed displays in stores, the pepper section is getting bigger and bigger and bigger because of the popularity for things like salsa and that type of thing. And a lot of the restaurants even take the large sweet peppers and they'll fill them with cream cheese and then they deep fry them.
Yeah, those are good.
Oh, those are really good. What do you do in the way of peppers, Steve?
I've tried most of the different varieties. Jalapenos work really, really well here. The sweet peppers have worked well. The Anaheim. I did plant, I think, a habanero. And
that's a hot pepper.
I just, I don't like the idea of chemically burning my mouth. It's just too hot for me. It's for me. The induction of pain to me is not a it's not a flavor. It's just too hot. So, but jalapenos are kind of to me that's a hot pepper. I mean, I wouldn't eat that raw unless you put it in with something else.
Yeah, a salad or something. Yeah.
But those are good. So I'll do the jalapenos, the sweet peppers, and the Anaheim's kind of a mild pepper too that I use.
Yeah, we talked a couple of weeks ago about a ghost pepper. Have you heard about those?
I have.
Yeah, they're
That'll about kill you.
Yeah, it will. Apparently, it's even put some people in the emergency room.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, but so I'd avoid those. Is there a secret to? Is there anything you do different with those when you're growing them as opposed to other plants, or say tomatoes?
They seem to be pretty easy, trouble-free. If you wanted to grow peppers, you don't have to do much to a pepper.
Yeah,
they seem to grow down here really well.
I noticed with mine, if something happens that they don't get enough water, after a couple of days, they really react to that badly. So your irrigation has to be right on. The trick, I think, with irrigation here is to water enough, but not too much.
Right, and the one thing that I have noticed is you might have to adjust. If I've got a drip system, I've got some areas that if you put it on a 3-day-a-week cycle, it might not be getting enough, and other places might be getting too much. You might have to adjust things a little bit.
That flexibility.
Yeah, because I've noticed that corn takes a lot of water. If you want to have corn that is fully formed and everything. So you have to kind of overdo the corn, and then the other areas might suffer with a little too much water. So you got it's a little finesse
That's
there.
one of those things that flooding irrigation works really well on corn.
Corn would work better.
When we were kids and we used to go to the farms, this had an assignment of the farm to irrigate the corn. It was you wore your hip waders, because you were going to get muddy because they would really flood that. But water down here is different than water in Salt Lake. It's a different resource.
Yeah, it is.
Cabbage. How about your cabbage, dude?
Cabbage it works great down here. It does take some water, and you have to watch out for the aphids. The aphids love that cabbage. It's really pretty sweet, and they're attracted to.
Have you grown any of the Chinese Oriental cabbages?
I tried to do the bok choy. It wasn't successful with that. I tried the leeks too, and that didn't really work. I couldn't
I've
make that
tried
work.
those, and they were real slow.
Yeah, they're really slow.
I mean,
growing.
it takes like 6 months
right.
to grow those successfully.
But the other varieties of cabbage, I get these very nice, huge heads, and that works really well, along with the broccoli. Really works well. So.
Artie, we're getting close to time. Do you want to give us an update on your neighbor ladies? You've still got the stalker lady that's after you.
Oh, yeah, my lawn chair neighbor. She likes to lay out her lawn chair, and then she gets the binoculars.
And she
just watches my house.
Does it make you self-conscious?
It really does. So
then why are you wearing Bermudas every time I come up there?
But no, speaking of which, speaking about my neighbor, we need to plant some vines or something to kind of,
maybe put a trellis up. And
yeah,
grow
absolutely. So I definitely will need some ideas from you this spring. So
yeah, we're going to do a little project over at his place. We're remodeling his yard, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
One of the things I told him that I have a lot of bedding plants like daisies and echinacea and things that I want to dig up and split this year. And I told him I'd take some out to his place.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And, that's an old tradition that's kind of gone by the wayside. My mother and her neighbors used to trade starts. And you didn't go buy things at a nursery. That was money.
My grandfather had a great row of raspberries. And you just take these raspberry starts, just stick a raspberry and you give it to somebody else, stick it in the ground.
Yeah, and the way it went.
Goes.
Yeah. Hollyhocks, that was a popular one, the different colors of hollyhocks. When I think of my neighborhood where I grew up, the different colors, everybody had hollyhocks and flags, the irises, and they're beautiful in the spring when they bloom. To me, they're every bit as pretty as an orchid, And they're
the
a lot
smell
easier.
is just wonderful.
Oh yeah, and the different things in the spring, the
daffodils,
and the snowball bush. There used to be a lot of snowball bushes up in Salt Lake, and they're that way. And lilacs.
Lilacs. Yeah.
Lilacs. People would plant hedges of lilacs. You couldn't get through them. I mean, they were every bit as good as a fence. But they would look beautiful and smell beautiful. You get a summer night in Salt Lake, you can smell the lilacs. So that's kind of fun. We haven't talked about that much. Do you do bedding plants and those kind of things and flowers?
A little bit. I actually put marigolds and geraniums at the edge of the garden, because of their natural pesticide properties.
Yeah, permethrin.
And so I'll have kind of at the edge or the margin of the garden, I'll put in some flowers, but that's not extensively around the rest of the house.
That raises a lot of people that get into gardening. They there's a fad to do natural gardening. There's a radio show from Florida where a guy talks about mixing natural, so much percentage of dish soap and urine and different things, and then spraying your garden. When I have pests, I just go by the. Is that how you do it too?
I do it too. I found that. I've lost a couple of peach and plum trees to the borers, and you have to really be careful and stay on top of that with some real pesticides. Otherwise, you're going to lose your orchard.
What pesticides work well for you?
There's one that's it's I can't remember the name. It's a livestock insecticide that you actually use for the borers, especially. It has to have that. It's the same thing that's in mothballs, one of the mothball
ingredients.
Ingredients, yeah. But that works.
Borers are really bad down here.
They are.
We talked about that with Doug a couple of weeks ago.
And you'll use your peaches and your apricots and your plums.
And if you've grown a tree for 10 years and it's just starting to produce, to lose it to borers is really sad.
Yeah.
And you can lose oriental trees. The ash and the locust are susceptible to borers, and there's I think 4 or 5 varieties of ash, and there's 2 of them. The raywood, I've had several of those killed by borers. There's some like the Modesto and that don't have the borers, but the raywood does.
Well, guess what? We did it.
We did
a show.
Another one's in the can.
Absolutely, with Dr. Steve. Thank you for coming by.
My pleasure.
We ought to take him to Good Morning America when they call us.
Oh, absolutely. No, we're going to become syndicated here soon.
Yeah.
We have an award-winning show here. Thanks for listening to The Garden Show with Woody and Dr. Steve, and I'm your producer, Artie.
And our station manager.
Absolutely. Sean Denovan, we want to thank him and the Dixie State University for letting us be a part of this wonderful radio station. And our Facebook is, of course, you can see us on Facebook Live. You can see us on YouTube. And if you'd like to, at any time, ask any questions or engage with us, that would be the best way to do so.
Yeah, call in. Please call in.
All right. Well, it's KXDI Radio St. George 100.3. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, it looks like we made it to another week.